Why should we care more about Moscow than people in Paris who are 2 hours away by plane? It doesn't make sense, and it's time to stop pretending that it does. Let Europe grow up and carry its own weight. America's job is not to babysit the world. If in 10 years all American troops in Europe for military purposes do not return to the United States, then this whole project will have failed. That's 70 years ago, over 70 years ago. And I'm getting tired of being asked to go home to Missouri and explain to working Americans, the people I represent, why they should send more money, more troops, more of their sons and daughters to defend a continent that refuses to defend itself. For 80 years, we've told Europe to get serious about their own defense. They have blown us off. They haven't listened. Maybe they never will, as long as we keep doing the job for them. Some of my colleagues seem to think that defending Ukraine matters more than defending our own border. I disagree, and so do the American people.
Hey there, Patriots. Welcome back to America First, where we put our country first. No apologies, no compromises. If you're tired of the U.S. being the world's babysitter while our own citizens are struggling, then you're in the right place. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any truth bombs. All right, let's get into it. Today, we're reacting to a speech by Senator Eric Schmitt, who absolutely nails it when he says it's time for Europe to get serious about their own defense. This clip, shared by Forbes Breaking News, lays out decades of American frustration with NATO and Europe's unwillingness to pull their weight. And let me tell you, as a proud American, I couldn't agree more. Let's break it down.
From Truman and Eisenhower through Reagan and Gates, U.S. leaders, no matter how committed NATO, have made some interesting comments I think are worth highlighting here. General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, noted that if in 10 years, this is, by the way, in 1951, if in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe for national defense purposes have not been returned to the United States, then this whole project will have failed. Dean Acheson, the Secretary of State, said the United States must lead, but it must not carry. President Kennedy said, we want to make sure that NATO is not a fair weather organization. The burden of freedom must be shared equally among its members. LBJ stated, LBJ had similar thoughts, and his administration demanded offset agreements from West Germany to cover the costs of U.S. troops there. President Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Nixon noted, the United States will participate in the defense and development of allies and friends, but America cannot and will not conceive all plans, design all programs, execute all decisions, and undertake all the defense of free nations of the world. Caspar Weinberger said, our European allies must recognize that security cannot be achieved by words alone. It must be backed by commitment and capability. Robert Gates, in his farewell speech to NATO, said there will be a dwindling appetite to expand increasingly precious funds on behalf of nations that are apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources to be serious and capable partners in their own defense. Even Secretary Mattis said Americans cannot care more for your children's future security than you do. While some of my colleagues have been wringing their hands over the possibility the United States might step away from its role as a supreme allied commander in Europe, I can tell you who isn't all that worried about it. It's the American people. Quite frankly, they probably thought that ended when Dwight D. Eisenhower was no longer the supreme allied commander. And speaking of General Eisenhower, I read that quote. If in 10 years all American troops in Europe for military purposes have not returned to the United States, then this whole project will have failed. That's 70 years ago, over 70 years ago. Time and time again, the United States is expected to shoulder Europe's defense while rich European countries sit back, issue statements, and undeliver. Some of my colleagues point out that since the war in Ukraine began, Europe has collectively spent as much as on European defense as the United States, as if that's some great triumph. To me, it just shows how upside down this whole arrangement is. How is it even remotely impressive that the nations defending their own continent are only barely keeping pace with the country across the Atlantic? If Europe really believes it's facing an existential threat from Russia, it should be spending not just as much as we have, but magnitudes more than we do. 10 times, 100 times. That's what a commitment would look like. And please stop telling me that comparing spending in Europe is even. That's laughably narrow. When you compare U.S. defense spending in Europe to Europe's, you ignore everything else America does worldwide, much of which directly benefits Europe. Who ensures freedom of navigation in the Red Sea when European trade flows there daily? We do. Who contains China's growing dominance across the Indo-Pacific, stabilizing global markets and maritime routes that Europe depends on? We do. Without U.S. global power projection, the European way of life wouldn't exist as we know it. And still, they won't even take primary responsibility for their own backyard. If Russia really is a continent-wide threat, as European leaders say, then where is the urgency? Where is the mobilization? With few exceptions, Poland and the Baltic states, Europe is not acting like it's facing down a generational threat, not even close. And I'm getting tired of being asked to go home to Missouri and explain to working Americans, the people I represent, why they should send more money, more troops, more of their sons and daughters to defend a continent that refuses to defend itself. Why should we care more about Moscow than people in Paris, who are 2 hours away by plane? It doesn't make sense, and it's time to stop pretending that it does. For 80 years, we've told Europe to get serious about their own defense. They have blown us off. They haven't listened. Maybe they never will, as long as we keep doing the job for them. So yes, maybe we should have a conversation about the Supreme Allied Commander role. Maybe having an American general in that seat furthers this ruse. We should have the debate, not simply dismiss it. Let's have an honest conversation about it. American priorities in Europe, what they should be. Let's stop confusing symbolism with strategy. And while we're at it, maybe let's stop waving foreign flags in the House floor when Americans can barely afford groceries. Some of my colleagues seem to think that defending Ukraine matters more than defending our own border. I disagree, and so do the American people. It's time to have a serious realignment. Let Europe grow up and carry its own weight. America's job is not to babysit the world. It's to protect our people and our interests. Full stop. General Cavoli, I had a bunch of questions for you, but I had to say what I had to say. So I guess since I'm the chairman, I'll ask one question right now. Greenland. Can you just talk about the strategic importance and why that matters to the United States of America?
Sure. I'll talk about it from my perspective as...
Yeah, not from a policy perspective, from a military perspective.
But from a military perspective, Senator, I'll limit my comments to my field of expertise, which is the European theater, right? EUCOM AOR and the SACEUR AOR. The key there is it forms the western border of the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, which is that body of water through which Russian submarines from the Northern Fleet in Murmansk come up and then down through that gap. And once they get past that gap, they break out into the Atlantic. It becomes very tough to track them. It's a vast expanse. There's some acoustic things about the underwater geography that make it pretty tough. From those positions that they can achieve, they can hold the U.S. homeland at risk, several important targets with land attack cruise missiles. Greenland is the western boundary of that gap. So my access to it, the airspace and water space bounding Greenland is absolutely critical for the United States.
First off, Senator Schmitt points out something we've been saying for years. This isn't a new problem. General Eisenhower, the same guy who led the fight to free Europe in World War II, warned back in 1951 that if American troops were still in Europe 10 years later, the entire NATO project would be a failure. Guess what? It's been over 70 years, and we're still there. Why? Because Europe refuses to step up. These are wealthy nations, folks. Germany, France, the UK, they're not struggling. They've got the resources, but they'd rather let Uncle Sam foot the bill while they sit back and issue statements. Enough is enough. Now, some people are patting Europe on the back because their defense spending has finally matched ours since the war in Ukraine. Let me ask you, do you really think that's something to celebrate? Europe is defending their own backyard, and they're only barely matching what we spend from across the Atlantic? That's not commitment, that's laziness. Senator Schmitt is 100% right when he says that if Europe really believed Russia was an existential threat, they'd be spending 10 times what we do. But they're not. Why? Because they know we'll step in and handle it. That's not fair to the American taxpayer, and it's not fair to the American soldier. And let's not forget, America isn't just protecting Europe. We're out here securing trade routes containing China and stabilizing global markets, things that Europe directly benefits from. Who's patrolling the Red Sea? We are. Who's keeping the Indo-Pacific in check? We are. And what do we get in return? A bunch of European nations who are too busy building social programs to invest in their own defense. It's like we're doing all the heavy lifting while they reap the rewards. That's not an alliance, that's a one-sided deal, and it's time we call it what it is. Now, I want to be clear. This isn't about abandoning NATO or turning our back on our allies. It's about holding them accountable. Poland and the Baltic states? Those countries get it. They're investing in their defense because they know what's at stake. But the rest of Europe? They're acting like this is business as usual. If Russia is such a massive threat, where's the urgency? Where's the mobilization? Europe isn't acting like they're facing a generational threat, and honestly, it's embarrassing. And let's talk about us, the American people. We're out here struggling to pay for groceries, gas, and housing, while our government sends billions of dollars overseas. Why should a farmer in Missouri or a factory worker in Ohio care more about Moscow than the people in Paris, who are just 2 hours away by plane? It doesn't make sense. And every time we send troops or money, it just reinforces Europe's bad behavior. They'll never grow up if we keep babysitting them. Senator Schmitt raises another great point. Maybe we need to reconsider having an American as the supreme allied commander in Europe. Think about it. Does having an American general in charge just make it easier for Europe to pass the buck? Maybe it's time for a European to take that seat and feel the full weight of responsibility. Let's have an honest conversation about what our role in NATO should be moving forward. It's time for change. Here's the kicker, folks. While some of our politicians are out here waving foreign flags on the House floor and prioritizing Ukraine, our own border is being overrun. Millions of illegal immigrants are pouring in, and our government wants us to focus on Europe's problems? No, thank you. Our job is to protect our people and our interests. That's what America First is all about. And just to touch on the military angle for a second, General Cavalier mentioned Greenland's critical role in defending against Russian submarines. That's the kind of strategic thinking we need to focus on. Protecting the U.S. homeland comes first, period. Look, Patriots, it's time for a realignment. For 80 years, we've been telling Europe to step up, and they've ignored us. Maybe it's time to stop asking and start acting. Let them carry their own weight. Let's focus on securing our own borders, protecting our own interests, and putting America first where it belongs. So, what do you think? Should we stop being Europe's babysitter? Should NATO's leadership change? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your fellow patriots. Together, we can make sure America stays strong, focused, and unapologetically first.